This a rolling, not a stop. Why it don't never stop? Just the flow that got the block hot. Super.
Hello everyone, this is Angela and welcome to my channel, Angie the ENTJ. Please be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and click on the notifications bell so you'll know whenever I upload any new content. Okay, so today's video is going to be quick, informal, not a lot of editing. I'm just recording as I go. Okay? And that is because it came to my mind that these people who are out here, I call them podcast theorists. You know, they come up with a theory and they create a podcast and they attract people based upon those theories, right? So that's why I'm calling them podcast theorists. One of the podcast theorists, especially in the red pill manosphere, black manosphere communities, is that women need to submit. And a lot of times when people talk about stuff, they come from a philosophical angle. And philosophy is okay. I took philosophy when I was in college. I took some philosophy courses, let me just say that. I took some philosophy courses when I was in college. So I think philosophy is a good thing. However, at the end of the day, you have to deal with reality. And reality comes in the form of numbers. And so I deal with a lot of numbers. I'll just leave it there. And when I hear these submission mantras about how women should submit, I'm thinking, well, you know, the places in the world where the women are more submissive also are places in the world where there's a high infant mortality rate, where there are high rates of poverty, where the rates of education for the population is lower, where the life expectancy is lower. They also tend to be places where social strife is a normal thing. So, but I needed to find something to show you all what I'm saying so you don't think that I'm just coming to you with a philosophy. So that's what I'm doing today. Here's some numbers. And the first thing that I want to show is something known as the infant mortality rate over the course of time globally. Because a lot of these podcast theorists like to harken back to the times of old when our grandparents married and never divorced. And they like to harken back with this idea that our grandmothers were very submissive women. And I can tell you for a fact, I was surrounded, thankfully, by a lot of my grandmothers, and they were far from it. I thankfully had the wealth of being around my great-grandparents, both of whom they were born in 1923. So I saw firsthand, and I was able to get that insight that I discover more and more every day as I get older, as time goes on, how wealthy I am because I was around my great-grandparents. So when I hear these people talk about, oh, you know, back in the day, they're imagining things, because I was actually, you know, I spent a lot of my formative years around people who were born in the 1920s, before the Great Depression, and who actually had to survive through the Great Depression and things like that. So these people are in a fantasy land. But anyway, back to what I was saying. So what I want to show here is a map that shows the infant mortality rate throughout the world globally. And down here where you can see hopefully a hand or an arrow or cursor or whatever, you'll see that the scale is showing 1950. Okay, so let me explain what we're seeing here. You see right here the US, Canada, France, Norway, Finland, Australia. They're in this orange category, okay, where it's saying that the infant mortality rate back in 1950 was between 2 to 5%. Okay? And we're supposed to be the West. We're supposed to be first, quote unquote, first world, right? And so what it meant is that of all the births that occurred in the nation, between 2 to 5% of those babies were unalived for whatever the reason. It could have been a birth defect, it could have been an illness, it could have been an accident before they were 1 year old, before they were a 1 year old. So that's what's meant by infant mortality rate. So starting back in 1950, we see as time goes on. Let me see if I can hit this play button. Oh, that goes a little too quickly. So let me try it again. We can see, now pay attention here to the US and Canada in particular. As we see as time goes on, the shade becomes lighter and lighter, right? So this means that now we're in the zone where we went from having anywhere between 2 to 5% in 1950. Here, let me go back there so you can see. We were at 2 to 5% to now we've cut between 1950 and 2021. We've cut infant mortality down to a tenth of what it was back in 1950. So what happened? Well, people, particularly women, became more educated. Now, let me go back to, let's see, 1972. You see, that's when Roe versus Wade was overturned, right? So by the time Roe v. Wade was overturned in 1972, around that time, or 1973, feel free to correct me in the comments, infant mortality was going down. And also, women were allowed to, in the United States, finally be able to get a bank account without needing their husband's permission in order to do so. Okay? So, as time goes on, let's bring it ahead about 10 years, still in that zone, because, you can change a law, but you can't change the society overnight. And as we go down, and around the mid 80s, going into the early 90s, we see that, we're knocking it down to 1%, about 0.5%. And, around that time, technology is advancing, women working and women having their own is a concept that's starting to mature. It's not a new thing like it was back in the 60s and the 70s after women's liberation. Okay. And so as time progresses forward, we're still, we lowered ourselves from 0.5% to 1%, and we're still here between 0.2% and 0.5%. So between 1950 and 2021, that is a significant improvement. But here's the point that I'm making. Back in the 1950s, women were more submissive, right? Well, look at what was going on. We had a higher infant mortality rate back then. But we fast forward in a time frame when women are not submissive, and look, infant mortality rates are down. Now, let's look at other places as we say this. Let me see if I can. Let me go to Asia. Okay. So, we're talking about the Philippines. Okay. Currently, the infant mortality rate in the Philippines, unfortunately, is between 1% and 2%. Now, remember, in North America, the US and Canada in particular, is between 0.2% and 0.5%. So, for these people that are saying that women in the Philippines are more submissive, and before I go any further, I see human beings as human beings, no matter where they're from, no matter who they are. Human beings are human beings. That's my perspective on things. But it's these scammers, these podcast theorists, that want to come up with these theories that because of a location, a geopolitical situation in the world, that it makes women one way and men another way, so on and so forth. No, we over here in the United States, and I can vouch that we have at least one or two people from every nationality and possibly every ethnicity on this planet walking around here in the United States. And, I see them when I go to Costco, and all of them have an iPhone or an Android. Human beings are human beings in my eyes. So on that note, that's where I'm coming from. These podcast theorists that want to go around and talk about submission. Here we are in the Philippines, and they have a infant mortality rate between 1% and 2%, which is higher than what we find in the United States. Now, let's go to, let's see. Okay, that's Myanmar. Thailand, okay, still slightly higher than the U.S., between 0.5% and 1%. Okay, so the less submissive women are, the healthier the population becomes. Now, let me go back to the world again. Now, thankfully, there aren't any places where it's at 20%. But if we go back in time, to how things were, let's see if we find, this is Yemen over here. And so they, at one point in time, this is in 1970 for Yemen, they had a infant mortality rate so high where 1 out of every 5 babies were perishing before they turned 1 year old. Okay? But as time progressed forward, they're doing better. Even though they're at war, unfortunately, they're doing better than they were back in 1970. I'll put it like that. And I feel like we all need to improve. Now, even though the infant mortality rate for the U.S. is low, when compared to other places, it's still not as low as what we see up here in the Scandinavian countries, which are highlighted here, and Japan, which is more towards the east. Okay, let me see if I can go into Europe. Okay, so right here we have Norway, we have Sweden, we have Finland, we have Iceland, we have Czechia. Let me see if I can find. Okay, we have San Marino. Okay, we have, I almost had it a second ago. I'm looking for Monaco, y'all. I was on Monaco a second ago. I know Monaco is located between Italy and France somewhere. But anyway, as I'm looking for that, what I want to point out is that the nations that have the least amount of infant mortality are the nations that tend to have a national scheme for health where everybody can go to the hospital for free. Okay, they tend to be nations that have a national scheme that yield a basic income for its citizens. Okay, tend to be nations where education is easily attainable. They're not paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to go to college or just to access college. You know, they may have private institutions, which are fine, but for the most part, they can go to a state institution and still obtain a higher education for a reasonable price. Okay. So that's what we have going on over here. And if you could see this little dot, let me see. There's a little dot between Italy and France. That's Monaco. Okay. And I'm pointing out Monaco for a reason. So let me go back to the world map. Now let me move on to another map. And that is of child mortality versus level of prosperity. Okay. So these are all the countries, and what you're looking at on your left hand side, you're looking at an income that says $1,000. So what that is representing is GDP per capita, which means what, in layman's terms, how much on average each person in that country is making. Okay? So if we look at the far left side, now we're in the year 2021, and we're going to keep it there for the sake of simplicity. We're looking at Burundi. Their GDP per capita is $705 per person. So in an entire year, the average Burundian citizen is making $705 for an entire year, y'all. That's a little more than $50 a month, $55 a month, something like that. Okay? So with that being said, their child mortality rates are at 5.3%. So what it means is that for every 100 children that are born, a little more than 5 of them on average. So let's just keep it simple and say 5. For every 100 children born, 5 of them are going to perish. And Burundi is a place that is located in a part of the world where women tend to be more submissive. Okay? Now let's move along to Niger. In Niger, just using it as an example, the GDP per capita, or each person, is earning $1,187 per year. Okay, that's less than $100 a month, y'all. And their infant mortality rate is over 11%. So for every 100 children that are born, what it means is that 11 of them are going to perish, right? And Niger, if for those of you who've been with me for a while, I did a video showing that they have historically in the world been the country with the highest level of child marriages. Okay? And so, again, going back to these podcast theorists that are saying that the more submissive a woman is, the better off things will be. Honey, I look at numbers and that's a lie. Okay? Now let's move on. Let me go to Latin America. Okay, we have the Dominican Republic. As of 2017, the GDP, or on average, every person in the Dominican Republic, this is one of the places that the passport bros like to go to, right? And claim that the women are more submissive there, right? Okay, their GDP per capita is $18,626. And their child mortality rates are at 3.3%. So for every 100 children born, 3 of them are going to perish. Because this chart is correlating the level of prosperity, okay, versus child mortality. Okay? So, what it's showing is that there is a tendency that when people are healthier, wealthier, and more educated, that children born into those societies have a higher chance of surviving. And on that note, let's go to North America. So we can compare the US and Canada. The US, according to 2017, our GDP per capita was $47,893. And our infant or child mortality rates was less than 1% at 0.5%. Okay? When we compare that to who we are, Dominican Republic, and then we have, let's see, I saw Brazil there earlier. Let me go. Okay, here we go with Brazil. Their GDP per capita is $14,592. So at that point in time, 2017, significantly lower than what you find in the US. And their child mortality rates at 1.4%. The US is less than 1% at 0.5%. Okay? So let's take it off of the US and whatnot, North America, and let's just look at income. So we have Luxembourg. Oh, okay, that's Switzerland. We have Luxembourg. In 2017, the average person in Luxembourg earned $115,683 each year. Okay? And their infant mortality rate, like the US, is less than 1%, but the US is at 0.5%, Luxembourg at 0.3%. Okay? Singapore, average income $106,032. Child mortality rate 0.2%. Again, the higher the income per person, the less children are perishing. And typically, whenever there's a higher income, that means that the women in those nations have more rights, they're more educated, they're not submissive. Okay? Japan. Okay? Child mortality rates 0.2%. Japan is facing a demographic crisis because they did have issues with women being overly submissive, and not only have their women migrated away, but of the women that are remaining, they're saying, nah, I'm not doing that. And so the Japanese government is trying to entice women to have more children because they have more people being unalive through old age than they are being born. So that's what we got going on there. Let's see. We have Australia. Again, these are places where the higher income means less children perishing. So let me move on to congenital birth defects. And I'm going somewhere with this, y'all. So if you could just bear with me. There's a reason why I'm showing this. So this is 2019, what the world looks like. Okay. Again, the number of children born with congenital birth defects and, who are unalived by it, right? So let me go back in time. See, in 1990, you can see as we progress through time that the lighter numbers mean that, or the lighter colors mean that there are less children in those nations being born with birth defects that will take them out, okay? Whereas we progress along in time, we see that different parts of the world get lighter and lighter in color. I'm going backwards because I want to show you something. And you notice . that the U.S. in particular remains at about the same level. It's going down from the 90s, okay? It trickles down, but by the time we get to 2010, it just remains kind of stagnant, right? Sorry. Let me go back. Okay. That's because I feel like we, unlike the nations such as Norway, Sweden, Finland, where the numbers are lighter, Canada, okay, we don't have a national health scheme. So, and because of that, like down here is Cuba, their number of birth defects that children are born with are lower because they have a national health scheme. But for the most part, in the countries where the shade is the lightest, these tend to be nations where women are not that submissive. These are places where women are quite independent for the most part. So now the next thing that I'm going to show in order to go against this ideology that the more submissive a woman is, the better off things will be. This is the World Bank, what I'm showing you. And over here is what's a chart of the entire world of GDP per capita. And what it means is that if you take the economy of that nation, how much profit there is, and you divide it by every person, the population, every person in the population indiscriminately, that the average person within that nation would earn whatever that number is. So that's what I'm about to show you now. So again, here we are. Let's do it by alphabetical order so it doesn't appear like I'm picking on any particular nation. I'm not that kind of person, but you know how some people can be. So the first one in alphabetical order is going to be Afghanistan. So what it's showing is that the average person is making $363.70 per year in Afghanistan. That's a little more than $60 a month, probably like a little more than $65 a month. Okay. And you can look at the news and tell the state of Afghanistan. Going down, Albania, $6,802, Algeria, and so on and so forth, right? Australia is here at $64,491.40. So here's what I want to do. I want to click on this where it says most recent value so that we can align it by income amount. So let me do that. And so we see as soon as I do that, Burundi, again, just like it was, let's see, was it here? Yep. You see Burundi had, in 2017, their GDP per capita was $705, and also their infant mortality rate was 5.3%. Okay. Now that we look at their GDP, what is saying in 2022 that it went down, and the average Burundian is making $238.40. Okay, so there's a correlation with being submissive, infant mortality rates, as well as lower GDP. And Afghanistan is next in line, Central African Republic. You can see, you can go down this list, right? So let me put it in descending order, okay? Because this is the point that I'm making. The first nation up here is going to be Monaco. So the GDP of Monaco is $234,317.10.
We're going to Monaco! This a rolling, not a stop. Why it don't never stop? It's the flow that got the block hot. Super hot.
Monaco is so wealthy of a country, they don't even need to track poverty. And see, these passport bros ain't talking about going to Monaco. And they're not talking about getting a submissive woman from Monaco. None of that submissive talk is directed at Monaco. Another one is Liechtenstein. And oh, by the way, in Monaco and Liechtenstein, I don't know if y'all know that there are black women that are married into the royalty there. Yes. So let me move on. So you have Liechtenstein. Again, their GDP, meaning the average person that lives there, the average citizen, is earning $184,083.30. I don't hear passport bros talking about going to Liechtenstein. Another one is Luxembourg. $126,426.10. They're not taking their passports to Luxembourg or even Bermuda, where the average person is making $118. I keep doing that. $118,845.60. And we see the same thing with Norway, Ireland, Switzerland, Cayman Islands, Qatar, Singapore, Isle of Man. Isle of Man is located between England and Ireland, okay? And here at the bottom, we have the U.S. Okay, so when you look at the infant mortality rates in the countries above the U.S., they tend to be lower than within the U.S. Now, the places that your passport bros are bigging up, let me see. Let me do a Control F on here for the sake of, let's see, Dominican Republic. See, their GDP is down here at $10,120.60 in 2022. Let's go to Brazil. Because, see, I deal with numbers, y'all. $8,917.70. Okay, so my point in saying all of this is that these people with their podcast theories are not pairing their theories with numbers, but I'm over here dealing with the numbers, and the numbers don't lie, and their theories just don't hold up. It's a fraud. I think the people who are doing this, they're motivated by wanting to take resources from anybody who buys into these theories, whether it's a man who buys into their theories and give them super chats, because that man is more concerned about draining his ball sack than he is about the impact of what comes after he drains his ball sack in some random woman. Okay? So he is going for whatever appeals to his lowest nature. And also the women that are pushing this, somebody is paying them money, so pay me to say whatever. I don't care. Yeah, so long as my bank account got multiple digits in it, I'll say whatever it takes, and then I'll disappear and not live the way that I just talked about. That's what I think is going on. It's a scam. And I know that I'm talking about like what happens when children are born, but I haven't touched on what happens in a society as a whole, which is why I put in the title that even people who don't want to have children need to be concerned, because you're paying taxes into a society for those taxes to be used to progress the society forward in such a way that benefits everybody. So like universal health care, universal income, or universal basic income rather, basic housing, basic access to food, also roads. Also roads. Things like the advancement of technology. We're landing people on the moon and talking about building stuff on Mars and things like that. Well, when you're in a nation that's filled with people that think that women should submit, the more that women have to submit, the less likely that nation is going to advance. Because the money that would be spent on advancing your economy is being spent on the cost associated with women being submissive to brutal males. And typically in that dynamic, they never have the resources to pay for the decisions that they're making. So those decisions that they're making randomly like that falls upon the greater population, meaning us, the taxpayers, to have to account for it. So if anything, this video is an opportunity to give you some numbers to show why submissive women, to show why the concept of women being submissive doesn't work. So like I said, pardon my unpolished video. I just kind of did this off the cuff. It would have been a live, but I had to get up and do something. So that's all I have to say for now. Please be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and click on the notifications bell so you'll know whenever I upload any new content. Thank you for watching, and take care until next time.
It's a rolling, not a stop. Why you don't never stop? It's the flow that got the block hot. Super.